Well, hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut Shop. This has been the biggest distraction at TCCN Automotive here. You've seen this in the background in many videos, and a lot of you have asked that you guys would love to check this out. And we'd love nothing more than to check this beauty out. This is a 1985 FJ60. It's a 60 series Land Cruiser. One of the most beautiful ones that at least I've seen in my lifetime. This car is in the shop for some work, and I'll show you what we're doing to it and whatnot. We'll take a tour underneath it, around it, but just take it in. It is such a beautiful car. I mean, look at the finer details of how immaculate this truck is. This is beautiful. So this car, the current owner, such a fine gentleman, by the way. We've talked a lot about this car, and this is kind of, he's slowly restoring it. So this car was restored at some point. I don't think it is original, everything, but it does have some work needed, some stuff needed. But before we get into that and kind of talk about what it needs, because old cars need a lot of stuff, let's take a tour around it. You know, the newer cars with their heritage grills and the heritage Toyota writing, that's where it comes from. This is exactly where it comes from, where Toyota just didn't have a badge before. They just used to write their name out, and that's it. And then you notice all the newer trucks, you know, they don't have recovery hooks. They're always underneath it, and people are trying to hide them. Can it be more clear than that? You clearly see the frame, giant gap. You clearly see that this one is directly connected to the frame. And then of course some features of the 80s for you. Headlight washers. That's just how they do this. What a beautiful car, I have to say. This thing is just chrome bumpers. Everything is in excellent shape. Something, again, for the youngins out there that have not seen this. See, on your newer car, when you want to go in four-wheel drive, even the ones that have a shifter, you get into a 4Runner with a manual transfer case. When you shift it, the front axle actually electronically locks. It has an actuator that locks the front, and that's how four-wheel drive happened. Well, not in these days. You had manual locking hubs. You just, every time you want to go in four-wheel drive, you do this. Now you're in four-wheel drive. You got to do it on both sides. You want to go two-wheel drive? That's it. Two-wheel drive. It's a very simple mechanism. All it does is it locks the axle to the hub. That's all it does. And now you have four-wheel drive. Very, very simple. Now, if you go on low range and whatnot, that's different. But this is how you engage four-wheel drive. You have to get out of the truck. Obviously, you see the benefit of electronic stuff. Of course, electronics have come a long way, but this is just beautiful. It is my opinion that these wheels are the correct wheels for this car. I mean, just look at them. They're beautiful. Believe these are, look at the size here, they're 15-inch wheels. You don't see a lot of cars with 15-inch wheels. See, back in those days, these were the coolest stuff you can have on a car. Just a little vent, just a little random vent. And this mirror, there is actually no adjustment for it. There's no way to adjust it on the inside. You just kind of do this deal and you get it where you need it. You leave it there. Because if you look on the inside, see, all new mirrors, because they're electronic, they'll have the big gap here. This one doesn't have it. That's how you adjust it by hand. Not even something on the inside. Nothing. Because they just deemed it too complicated to do. So just, there you go. And then look at the door handle. Listen to that sound. It's not some chintzy plastic one. This is actually a metal door handle. See, this is where they cared about quality, where it matters not in the gizmos and everything. This has 0 gizmos. They were never shy about putting the key opening just right there in the middle of the body line. And they even curved the body line for it, just to emphasize it. Then as we walk back, same thing here. Metal handle. The way the font they used to write Land Cruiser with, what a beautiful font. I love it. And then because this is a US model, you have the side lights right here, the marker lights. Then we look at the back. See, this is another thing that they were not shy of exposed bolts. Nobody really cared about this stuff. I mean, look how simple this is. Take another 5 minutes to change this out in its entirety. Very simple. Rear wiper, four-wheel drive in the old fonts that they used to use. This particular one is for the blue variety. Let's take a look at the back here. So you notice that it's the same thing up to the 200 series, the way the back door opens. So the half goes up and then the other half comes down. But just look at the condition of this car. It's just, of course, and what's a Land Cruiser without some parts in the back? That's part of the stuff that we're doing to this. Beautiful. So, I want you to notice how simple cars used to be, and that's why they were not expensive, they were reliable. Not that new cars are not, but new cars are getting a lot more complicated. I mean, just look at this. You have this little panel here. It takes you 5 seconds to pop it out and we're done. This is very simple plastic. There is nothing to it. Giant window. Oh, look how big this window is, how much you can see out of it. Things are very simple. Very simple metal hinges. You don't have fancy soft close, soft open. No, just that. Everything exposed. We were not shy about hiding stuff. I want you to notice the little stuff. This is the wire for the rear defroster. They didn't even bother hiding it. Because why? It just doesn't bother nobody. Look at the ground wire is fully exposed. I mean, if they do that to modern cars, they will never hear the end of it. But here it is. One of the legendary cars that they have has this. The cool thing is these have locks. You can just manually lock the back and we're done. Whatever. This is a different era, folks. Do you notice Toyota is very small in the back? That's not, they didn't want to be flashy in these days. Things were simple. As we walk around it, lockable gas door, of course, unleaded fuel only. This was the time for that. I mean, 5th generation 4Runner doesn't even have that. That's how things are. But let's take a look inside it. This, except if you look in the older Land Cruisers, this was, in my opinion, the breaking point. This is the last Land Cruiser that was kind of closer to the FJ40 than it is to the newer ones. So the 80 series, even though it was still a very truck, but the interior got more like civilized, more advanced, more nicer, kind of featureful a little bit. Oh, this interior. There is not much to it. I mean, you still have the HVAC box kind of half exposed underneath the dash. You could literally see half of it. And the HVAC controls were extremely basic. This style, actually, they carried it into the 90s, even into very early 2000s in some models. Don't need to tell you what that is. If you're 80s generation and older, you will know what that is. But look how simple things were. I mean, this is not original, by the way. This is an add-on. So we never had these in that time. Nobody drank stuff in their car. Long shifter. That's how they did this. Manual transfer case, of course. So here's the thing. Putting this in four-wheel drive is a little bit of a process. You still have two-wheel drive, 4 high. So if you want to shift this in four-wheel drive, you first have to put the transfer case, doesn't matter if it's first, put this in 4 high and lock the hubs as well, because right now it's not, the transfer case is not spinning the front drive shaft. But if you only do this, it'll spin the front drive shaft, but the axles are not connected to the hub, so you need to lock them. That's the cool thing about this. It's very simple, really rugged and bulletproof. I mean, what is there going to happen to it? Just all mechanical stuff. And then we look at the steering wheel. This is something with the older Land Cruisers. Tiny, skinny steering wheel. Tiny little rev counter. And it barely goes to 4,000 RPM. That's how they did this. They gave you your gauges. They gave you your speedometer, which only goes to 85 miles an hour, which you will never get there in this car. Let's just put it this way. And here's the best part. This is a non-airbag steering wheel. So the horn is right here. Very cool horn. Another thing you notice here, for those who are not familiar with cars of this era, you have this, and you'll be wondering what that is. That is the choke. So this is a carbureted car. When you start it in the morning, they actually don't have enrichment, so you have to pull this, which will actually make the car run richer until it warms up. Then you slowly start backing it up until we're done. See, the newer carbureted cars after this, they had an automatic choke, which was the coolest thing in the planet. Way complicated. It was ridiculously complicated, but it prevented you from having to do this. Every time you start your car, as it warms up, you go down, down, down until the only thing today that still has a choke is lawnmowers. And some of them are even getting rid of that, but you still see that here and there. But I want you to, I'm going to get out so you guys can see it. I want you to see the simplicity of the build. Everything was so simple. All exposed bowls. Everything is out there. You look at the pillar, tiny little pillar. You have huge visibility. And this is something we were talking about the other day. Newer cars with their airbags and technology and everything. This pillar is getting massive. I mean, huge on newer cars. Look how tiny this thing is. This is the days of old cars. Your biggest safety feature here is going to be your seat belt. They were really proud of that back in that day, because there was a time when cars didn't have seat belts. Well, let's take a look under the hood here. And of course, this, I haven't seen this in a while. The old school hood release, when they had an actual handle. Let's take a look at the slight relic that lives here. This is the 2F motor. Very, very old school motor, folks. I mean, when the FZ series engine came out in the 80 series, it was a giant leap in technology compared to this. These are really good engines, but they're in 2024 extremely fragile. I probably offended 10 Land Cruiser owners right now and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. These engines don't like ethanol. That's the problem. So I want you to notice a few things about this engine that are, if you've never worked on older cars, a few things I want you to notice. Notice how this side of the engine doesn't have exhaust, doesn't have intake. Your spark plugs are right there. You still have a few, not very 24 cars, but few cars are still running with spark plugs that are on the side. That's pretty standard. But you notice there's no cylinder head, there's no, exhaust or intake on this side, nothing. And that's because they used to do it the other way. It's very inefficient, of course. If you look here, you come right here and look at it, the intake and the exhaust are on the same side, because we did not have 16 valve, 4-cylinder. No, we just had couple valves. That's about it. One intake, one exhaust, so they can do it on one side. That's how they used to do this. Very interesting to see this, at least for me, 2024, that this still runs. It runs. Talk about it, has a few issues. But this car, this era in the 80s, this is where all of a sudden they decided we have to save the environment. So these cars were severely choked with emission devices. This one has been, they call it desmogged. So smog is the emission test of California. This has been desmogged, so all the emission stuff is gone. So when you start this car, your eyes will start to water until it warms up, even when it warms up. So that's one of the things, a reminder that all the emission stuff is not just to make some tree happy. No, it's actually for us. So when this starts, my eye starts watering immediately. And I grew up in a country where this is the engine to depend on. Every single car was like that. We had no smog and no emissions. We barely had basic things. So this is a reminder that emissions are not there for nothing. So let's look at a few of the interesting stuff. Very interesting location for a distributor. It's all the way down, middle of the engine. And You notice the simplicity of things. Look at this massive oil filter. Of course, this is back in the day. Very simple engine bay. I mean, it may look complicated. You know, you look at all this stuff. What is this stuff? It's actually nothing. There's no stuff. Just spark plug wires, and this is emissions, which doesn't even do anything. And even the wiper motor is right here. There's no cowl. There's nothing. Things are very, very basic. And then we look at the other side. This is where we have some of the relics. This, my friends, in case somebody doesn't know that, which they should, this is a carburetor. It's a very basic carburetor. There isn't really, this is, although in the time, and don't quote me on this, again, this is a little bit older stuff. This was not the most advanced carburetor they had. There was, I forgot what was the name of the engine. They had an engine that had an auto choke, which that was like the groundbreaking stuff. That probably came in the 70 series. We looked at a 7 series that had that, but this is a little bit on the older side. See, the problem with carburetor cars in 2024 is ethanol. Floats get stuck, nozzles get rusty, things rust out because of the ethanol. These were never meant to run on with fuel with ethanol, so they slowly degrade. And you notice the older cars that used to be very reliable back in their day, they're no longer very reliable, even you build everything new, because fuel that we have is different. This is what's actually going on with this car. See, this carb is running too rich, so it's washing down the cylinders over time, and this engine actually burns oil at an unbelievable rate. So you start a cloud immediately and it smokes here and there. So look at the cylinder walls, they're done because of that. So what this is going to need is a complete engine build. It needs a carburetor gone through. This is the problem with us. This is where we're stopped with this car. So I don't have a machine shop that I trust locally, and this is a call out to any machine shops that are watching. If you're in our local area, Homer Glen, or anywhere nearby, if you're willing to work with me, I would love to get a machine shop. I'm at a point where I'm like, you know what, we should start buying some machines, start learning how to machine ourselves, because this is the time where everything is repairable. Nothing is throwaway. It's a different era, folks. Carburetor we can build, although it's not cost effective. You probably get a reman one already is a better option. So owners exploring their options with this one. I told him we can do stuff, but I don't have a strong machine shop. Machine shop we work with is great, but I think this is outside of their area of expertise. So call if anybody owns a machine shop and you do proper engine work. Let's work together. What a beautiful engine bay here. It's so simple. It's extremely simple. I mean, look at this carburetor. It looks very complicated, but folks, this is extremely simple. This is the days where cars were very basic because they didn't need to do much. This engine, all this giant 6-cylinder engine, makes half the power that any 4-cylinder today from the worst car makes. That's how these were. But having said that, let's put this car up on the lift, and I'll show you underneath it. We'll take a tour, so some of the relics underneath it, and I'll show you the next thing that it is that we're doing to it, which is the front hubs. Let's take a tour underneath 60 series, and just like the 80 series, they do have this cover right here with all kinds of vital fluids leaking out of it. That is just the way with old cars, folks. You can't get away from it. Leaks are inevitable. These cars sit, and that looks like the coolant variety. Not a big leak, it's just a small seepage. Let's look at the front here. Let's look how they used to do things. Things were very different. See, this is a proper truck off-road setup. Leaf springs in the front. Everything is heavy duty. You have a proper axle in the front, like a differential and a housing and everything. And then brings us to what this car is here for. You notice oil's leaking out of here, and it's coming all over the wheel and everything. It's actually, some of it's going over the brakes. So here's how this works. You notice this car doesn't have ball joints or anything. We were just talking about this. Jose was asking about this. So this is your axle housing right here. You see this ball? There's actually nothing inside this ball but the axle coming out and a bunch of grease. There's a felt wiper here that just keeps that grease inside. So what is leaking here is not grease. This is not grease. This is gear oil. So there's an axle seal that sits right in this area on the inside that keeps the gear oil from contaminating the grease. So the way this works is there's a big axle that connects to the differential. It's just a bar, goes through. Then there's basically a CV joint here. So when the wheel turns, that joint turns with it. They're commonly referred to as Burfield joints. Notorious to go out. When you make sharp turns, they'll start popping and making all kinds of noises. So here's the deal with this. What holds the wheel to the axle or to the hub or connects the two, there is a bearing and a pin here. There's a bearing and a pin at the top, and that's actually what holds the wheel to connects it to the axle itself. And of course that bearing is there so when you turn, you can make the turn. And then there's two wheel bearings, and on the other side of things, you have the locking hub. This is basically all it does is it takes that shaft in the middle, which the end of it here is going to be that Burfield, which is like a little mini CV axle, and locks it to the wheel rotation. I hope that makes sense. It's harder to explain it. I wish we could film. Maybe we'll end up filming a small thing so you know how these work. They're very basic mechanical stuff. Huge mess because you got to pack all kinds of grease, and there's actually two types of grease. There's wheel bearing grease for the wheel bearings, and then there's the different type of grease, the moly grease for the actual CV joint. If you mix them, we have all kinds of problems. That's the main thing about this. So going back to this car, I mean, there isn't much going on here. You do have shocks. You do have, actually, this was groundbreaking stuff. You'll have a sway bar. This is, yeah, tiny little sway bar for this giant thing. And the other thing that they have, you notice there's no rack and pinion. You have a steering gear right here, when that's what makes the wheel turn. So you have this arm connected to this wheel, and then this arm connects to the other wheel. So when the steering gear moves, this is the steering gear is hydraulic. That's what your power assist is for the steering. It turns this wheel, and this arm kind of pulls the other wheel, and that's how this works. Very old school stuff, super vague. That's just how these were. But they do have, this 80 series has the same thing. You do have this little shock here. It's kind of dampens some of the vibrations of the road, so you wouldn't feel every little thing in the steering. Doesn't work very well, just heads up. This is just old stuff here. But look at this motor, how massive it is. I mean, this thing is enormous. So engine ends right here and goes all the way to there. Very industrial type engine. Small leaks here and there. That's pretty typical for cars like this, folks. You'll never get them 100% leak free. That just doesn't exist. You notice the drain plug on the engine. This is the old school 24 millimeter drain plug, not the familiar 14. So this 7M engine also has a 24 mil. This is the old stuff. Going back here, transmission. It's actually not a huge transmission. It's actually a small manual transmission. And the transfer case is attached to the back. Come around and see it. And we look at another relic. Speedo cable is another thing that doesn't exist. Good riddance, in my opinion, because they were, yeah, they start flickering on you and all kinds of stuff. But this is basically a cable that turns the speedo, and that's how you get your speed. It picks it up out of the output from the transfer case, because this is what actually is going to drive the rear wheels when we go. So you notice this did have all the, so this doesn't have any catalytic converters. You notice this sensor is actually zip tied up. This sensor is a catalyst temperature sensor. This is part of the smog system. All it does is just turns on a light when the catalytic converter overheats. That's all it does, just tells the temperature. But everything else is extremely basic. You notice this does have rear heater core lines, but it does have AC in the back. That's just how they did this, very basic. Tiny little boxed frame. This frame, believe it or not, is easier to lift than the 80 series. 80 series is very strange and wide open. There's no insulation. They didn't care about none of that. Look at this. You know, we were just reviewing, I think it was a Ford Ranger on the second channel, and I told you that the leaves, they only had 2 leaves. Tiny little thing. Look at this. They don't do stuff like that anymore, folks, because, yeah. cars are not made like these. These were made like tanks. Front brakes in the rear, actually disc brake in the front on this one. This is another thing that we're doing to this. The brakes feel very strange. Like you press them, they're not really responsive. The rear shoes are very old. Surprisingly, the axle seals are not leaking here, but we're updating the brakes in the back as well. You notice the parking brake. This is a very familiar, if you come around, Jose and show them this. Very familiar. It's not exactly the same setup, but we use actually very recently, but similar. So you have these cranks that move. You have one here and one here. Pulls and engages the parking brake. Very basic, very simple. Spare tire, of course. This is the era of that. And you notice it's actually a BF Goodrich matching, and the wheel is matching. This is a proper size spare tire. And here's a little stuff that just, you don't see this stuff anymore. There's grease fittings on everything. Unlike newer cars, we're getting away with that. There's even grease fittings on these bushings with the shackle here. That's pretty interesting. And then this trailer hitch is actually a bolt-on to the frame. It's not part of the frame. What a beautiful car. It's so basic. These cars, the beauty of them is, you buy a car like this, you gotta do some stuff on your own. At least I feel it that way, because they're so basic. You just look at this, you admire how they used to do things this basic, this rudimentary, and people were happy with it. People will never be happy if you make this car new today, honestly. You know, we all say, let's bring back old cars, they were simpler, they were easier, but nobody will buy this in 2024 if it was a new car. Nobody will, because our lives are much busier, much faster paced. This is just too slow for our lifestyle. But as an enthusiast buying this car, it's just beautiful. That have to be said. And this is the biggest distraction in the shop, of course, after this one, which, yeah. This has been the biggest distraction in the shop. I find myself sometimes just looking at it, literally just stand here and admiring it, because it's such good shape. This is a complete different era for Toyota, and some will say this era is gone and never come back. Folks, if everybody that buys new cars today or drives cars, if you go drive this, I'll just tell you one thing: we'll get nothing done. Thing is slow, it's horrendous on gas, and they are very temperamental. That's how cars were back in those days. But the best part is nobody complained about that. That's just, if cars today are like they were in the 80s or 70s, we would be complaining a lot more than what we already are complaining. This is the thing with these cars. So you got to know that if you admire cars like this and you want to get into them, I will tell you one thing: if you daily drive this car, you are a very brave man or woman, because they are very temperamental and the times have moved on. Parts are difficult, and the current gas situation is not ideal for these cars. So these are obviously collector cars, beautiful cars. I mean, you find one in this shape, this is just kind of a no-brainer. To me, I would go with an 80 series, just because they are a little bit more creature comforts, a little bit more usable than these. These are very, very, very slow. You get on the road, you gotta be in a non-hurry state all the time. That's the one thing about them. They were always like that. They're utilitarian vehicles. They're not really meant for, you know, get up and go. You gotta wait for it to warm up and deal with the choke and do all that. So in 2024, things have changed, but nonetheless, it is just a beautiful sight. So in case you are not familiar with this, this is a 60 series. There's actually a 62 series, which had kind of a square lights and square everything. They're slightly different than this, but they're very similar. They're technically the same generation, but I always like the 60s more than the 62. 62s kind of look like a 80s car. Everything is just squares and blocks. This one is kind of the timeless look. I love it. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.